So this is chess, but like you've never seen it before. It's Chess 960 or Fischer Random or Freestyle Chess. It has a lot of names, right? But the point being, the pieces are jumbled up into 960 different starting positions. Don't worry if you're watching this and you've had a drink. We see it too. The pieces are jumbled up. You're not going nuts. Now, let's get some details down on the table here. This is a tournament being played in Germany at this stunning resort organised by this guy. His name's Jan. He's been working with Magnus Carlsen. They met at the Qatar Masters 2023. This whole event's then been organised since then and no expense spared. The resort, the jackets, look at these things. Whole colours everywhere. There's Magnus picking his up. Gukesh D, of course, the king of chess fashion. He's got one too. Here's a few of the lads wearing their jackets. It's just throwing me off a bit that Vincent Keimer looks like my Aunt Cynthia. For those that don't know, Vincent, he's the second in there wearing the yellow jacket. So the players are going to wear these during the games and at the closing dinner. We've got rapid chess to come first, a couple of days of that. Then classical chess, and you've got the old and young generation here. Magnus hand-picked the players for an exciting event. I think that's the key details. Any more questions, let me know below. The rules of chess are the same, but the pieces are different from the start, of course. Castling looks weird, but we'll get to that. It roughly follows the same principles here. And we're going to look at Gukesh D with the white pieces here, playing Magnus Carlsen with black. It's round 2. Let's check this one out. So Gukesh goes pawn to f4. This would be the birds opening, sorry, in a normal game of chess. But obviously here everything's jumbled. Now you do open the bishop, you do want to activate. Magnus goes c6, a Caro-Kann type move in normal chess. But okay, he's activating queen and bishop. We get g3 supporting that pawn. f5 from Magnus, he follows suit. You want to activate the pieces, right? Knight f3 and bishop b6 offers a trade of bishops immediately. Gukesh doesn't go for it and open the a file. Instead c3, good move, opens his queen. Magnus takes here, rook recaptures. That now means that Gukesh cannot castle this way. You basically have to have no pieces in the way of king and rook, and then you can move the king all the way over to the normal castling square. The rook would come to the normal position it takes once castles is played, but not now it's moved. So knight d6 from Magnus. He covers his pawn, looks at e4. So d3 covers an important square, and now b5 from Magnus. Looks weird, right? Obviously you're kind of activating that queen there, but I mean we're not going to get hung up on alternative moves. This whole thing is nuts. The players don't know what's going on. The commentators, the recappers who pretend to know what's going on at the best of times. This thing's nuts. So e4 is played. Magnus captures, pawn takes back. Queen b6, activating, scything down this diagonal towards the rook. Therefore, don't move your knight. Loose pieces drop off. Knight 1 to d2 develops. And now here, the game just goes nuts. I've said nuts too many times. But think of the most random move and then play it. Like, what's the last move you'd think to play off here as a decent move? You just wouldn't think of it, right? If you thought of it, well done. The move is g5. That's what Magnus plays. And it's the top engine line. Like, it's so hard to even understand this. But I think I understand it now I've looked at this game for longer and longer and longer. Now, knight takes cannot be played, or you drop a rook. So, pawn takes was played, accepting the pawn, natural, and now just knight e6 hits that pawn. Okay, it's defended by the knight, but the knight's defending the rook, so the rook moves, so the knight's not overloaded, and now bishop f7. Magnus reveals what I think is the point. That bishop can now find work on these two great diagonals. You know, imagine it on g6, looking down here, well, there's no pawn here to go f5. This seems to be the big idea and why the computer likes it. So bishop b3 played, and now keep your eye on the king and the rook. No, you are not going crazy if you've had a drink. They did just swap like that. This is how they castle in chess 960. You could have also, by the way, castled this way, just to show you how it looks. King stays on the same square, rook comes here, but that wasn't played. We'll go back to the moves. So Magnus goes this way. Now queen c2 and a5 expanding. a4 action could be on the cards. Some of the top moves here are a3 or a4. The absolute top move is g6. Madness. Bishop comes, but then it's all about going knight e5 and picking up some tempos. Really hard to understand. Gukesh goes e5, however, and look at the reaction of the evaluation bar. Computer hates it that you've opened this diagonal. So Magnus goes bishop g6, a Zwischenzug, hitting that queen before moving this knight. He whispers it into the mic, of course, as all the top professionals do. Now we see bishop takes on e6 with check, another Zwischenzug. Gukesh also whispers it back. They're top professionals here. Pawn takes back and queen b3. Keep your eye on the amount of Zwischenzugs we see in this game. They love it. So we get knight b7 now played. Another pawn drops. This whole sequence from g5 and then all of this stuff is just insane. You know, it's changing the way we look at chess, these kind of games. So rook f7 to block the check. Cover the pawn here, and now knight d4, really important move, counter-attacking on c6. Now after knight c5, hitting this queen, and it takes another pawn, Magnus 3 pawns down, well now it reveals the entire point of black's play, because you land this check on d3, the king comes this way, you don't want to step into the diagonal of course, and now it is being hunted. But it's amazing you can be 3 pawns down and be better just for the king safety issues like this. Now, if you chop the queens and then pick up an exchange, not good. White's got just too many pawns for the exchange. So the best way to play, as Magnus does, is checking the king from b2. It steps to e2. Now, here, Magnus has a choice and he goes wrong. So what he should do is keep the queens on the board with queen d8. But he takes. And this is actually a very good move, a natural move, if Gukesh plays in a natural manner back. So after rook c8, hitting this knight, hitting the pawn behind as well, if you now retreat with knight d4, we'll jump to the back cave here, the board's grayed out, this didn't happen, well then there's bishop h5 check. You can't step this way, you know, knight's covering and bishop, rook's on the f-file. If you step up the board, well then you're getting hunted like this. If you put a knight in the way, still you're getting hunted. You know, black's doing tremendously here. So this is what Magnus was playing for. But he must have missed this. He didn't use loads of time on the clock. Gukesh comes up with one of the classiest moves you've ever seen. It's almost as good as Aronian in his jacket here. He plays the move of pawn to e6. How about that for a Zwischenzug? Because now if you take the knight, you take this rook. And after Magnus checks a Zwischenzug of his own, king e3, well he can't play the natural rook back to f8 looking to come here, let's say, because the knight takes. With check, rook drops. Wow. So, rook g7, that is ugly, and now knight e5. You don't have to put the knight on d4, you can come to e5. What's the significance of that? Well, if you crash through, now the king finds a great home on d4, picking up a tempo on the rook, the knights are hopping, the rook's coming, white's doing well. So, rook takes on g5, played by Magnus. The knight is hit, but knight d4, sorry, king d4. What an absolute great move, because after check, which Magnus plays, there's knight d7 blocking the way. Now bishop g6 was the top move here to support a knight d3 kind of idea. This is a very important diagonal in general, but what Magnus does is bishop g4, going after this pawn, but now rook e5, you take me, my king marches in, computer says it's best, but okay, Magnus drops back, pressures the pawn here, and now Gukesh goes rook to d5, setting up some nasty threats. You know, if you win the pawn with either piece, well there's this knight f6, discovered check, winning the rook. So what does Magnus do here? Well, he goes into the tank. And like all great champions, he uses one of his superpowers, which is the ability to transform himself into a chess piece. He chooses a knight. It helps with the concentration as he tries to spring out of this difficult situation. He's using the power. He's kept the hair. The brain is turning. What can Magnus Carlsen do here? He comes up with a move. What he plays is king to g7 here, just stepping away from the discovered checks. He's burnt some time, still ahead on the clock, but not by loads. So knight e5, stumbling back, offering an exchange. We see rook captures, king takes. Why would Gukesh allow this takes with check? Well, after knight d4, we see the point here. Rook h6, yes, pressuring pawns, but white is really well positioned now to turn the screw on the queen side. The black pieces uncoordinated, the knight stumbling back to a4, and now the pawn on b5 drops. Look at those black forces. They're scattered like wayward asteroids. Whereas Gukesh's pieces orbiting this king like a planet in the center of the board. Fantastic coordination. Now Magnus has got a choice. Does he take here? Does he take here? They're different variations, different games. He goes for this one, no doubt worried about this pawn dropping and then an a pawn running. So he goes for that one, but it's risky because c4 shuts the way. The bishop cannot get out. Shadows moving in the dark to trap it in. Can he escape? Well, rook takes on h2 played, hits the knight on d2. The top move for Gukesh is to drop the other knight back to f3, defend its brother, hit the rook, but he misses it. He goes with this knight. Now we get the rook coming back to h6, and rook takes on a5. Surely it's curtains for one of those pieces. You can't hold on to both. But here's Magnus's point. He checks and you can't step to c3. The knight covers, whoops. So the king steps this way. Now the knight can escape, hurrah, but rook a3. Another new problem to solve. So Magnus checks. We get king e2 played and bishop b1. Magnus hanging on here by the skin of his teeth. c5 pushed, the rook centralizes, c6, bishop f5 covering the queening square, c7, that's 3 pawn moves in a row. Gukesh one step away from a baby girl, and now knight b2 from Magnus as he tries to extricate that horribly trapped piece. He wants rook c5, no longer having to babysit the knight. So rook a2 played, hits it. It's undefended here, and now the computer wants knight d3. Top move apparently, but the bishop's overloaded. You can win a piece like this. So understandably, Magnus doesn't do this, but it speaks to how horrible the position is. Magnus backpedals back to d1, looking for the cheapo, forking king and rook from c3, and so the excellent move was played by Gukesh of rook to c2 here. Why is it so good? Well, you're hanging an entire rook, but it's immune. Bishop overloaded, as we said, same problems. So the bishop drops all the way back. Of course, the pawn was about to push. Now we see knight d3, trapping this awkward, wayward knight on d1 there. King f6 from Magnus. Rook c1, trapping that knight. But is Magnus going to go gently into that good knight? Hell no. He goes e5, looking for e4, forking the pieces. It's an incredible fight back. Now takes was played, but this was Magnus's idea. Knight to b2, and if you take that knight, well, black takes this one, coming right back into the game. Odds on for a draw. So the knight not touched. Rook f1 check, and it's really hard to find a good square for the king. You know, if you step to e6, then there's rook f8 invasion stuff. If you step to g7, where you can check from f7 using the knight, the lines go on. But Magnus stepped to e7, we get this check here. It's such a complicated game. Now king d6, rook f6 check. So the king takes the pawn, the pride and joy. Gukesh has let it go. Why? Well, he picks up the knight here. He's a minor piece to the good. Is it enough to win, however? So bishop b7 hits the knight on c6. It moves back to b4. They're low on time. Magnus shifts across with the rook. Knight c4 now from Gukesh. He's going on the hunt. This is such exciting chess. I love this freestyle stuff. And smash subscribe, by the way, if you haven't already. So many more games to come this week. Now we see rook h3 going after this pawn here. Does Gukesh go for some kind of defense? No, he checks. Look at the barrier that those knights form. Incredible. The king steps back. Knight d6, you're about to win a piece. So bishop h1, moving all the way out the way. But knight a6 check. The king forced to the corner. This is a threat of mate in 1. Sorry, I'm too ahead of myself. The kids just got back through me. Knight b5. Now there's a threat of mate in 1. And it was enough for Magnus to throw in the towel and resign the game, because how do you stop that checkmate? Well, here is one way, the top engine move, but then you check. The king can't move, bishop's got to block, you're about to win another piece. Now the most precise way is move the knight away first, then knight d6 coming, that kind of thing, but you're going to win the bishop and then you'll be winning the game. It's way too much material ahead. This was just an incredible battle. And look at this on screen. These were the results at the end of day 1 after 4 rapid games. Wow, does that tell a story? The 4 old guys languishing down the bottom, the youngsters up top dominating. That is really, really interesting. And Ding Liren, it's brutal, losing every single game. Poor guy. I'll be back soon with more epic recaps. Thanks very much for watching, and for another great game of chess, check out the video on screen. Cheers.